Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everyone. Welcome to Hands-On Apologetics. Yes, you have entered into the Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, where we talk about how to explain, to share the faith with confidence and clarity. I'm Gary Michuta, and thanks for tuning in. We got a great show in store for you today. We're going to talk about morality, and is it possible for non-believers to anchor a moral system in such a way that it would mimic, I guess you could say, believers' moral systems? In other words, for us, we believe in God, and upon that basis, we can come up with natural law and a moral system. But what about unbelievers? Where do they go? Well, Master Apologist Ken Hensley is coming into the dojo today. He's going to join us and talk about this, morality and atheism, I guess. What are the attempts that non-believers will use to anchor their moral system, and whether or not it's feasible, it's plausible. So Ken's going to come in. He's given a lot of thought on these matters. I'd love to hear what he has to say. And by the way, he's just a fun guest to have on. Looking forward to that. We also have our regular segments, I could say. We're going to talk about critical thinking skills, finding the fallacy. Each program we go through a fallacy and work through that so that when we're explaining, sharing the faith, we're just reading the media, picking up a newspaper if those are still out there, or watching a YouTube stream or what have you. We can think critically about what we read and whether or not there are good, solid, logical arguments out there. So our finding the fallacy for today is the fallacy of the relative privation. A scary name, but actually it's pretty simple once you get down to it. It's fallacy of relative privation. And also, every program we meet one of the early church fathers, kind of get a brief introduction to the life and works. And today's early church father is one of my faves. Is St. Epiphanius of Salamis. St. Epiphanius, yes, he actually wrote some very valuable works in regards that, us as Catholic apologists use a lot. He has very interesting insights into the early church. Well, we're going to learn about him today. And I also want to welcome all those watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody out there in social media land. It's good to see you. Thank you for the emojis. Yes, very colorful, like that. Very spring-like, too, by the way. Thank you, folks. And I'd like to welcome you to our program. If you have a question for Ken, give us a call, 888-526-2151. That's 888-526-2151. Love to hear from you. And also, emails. We have the Dojo email box. If you want to share something, maybe you come up with an apologetic technique that you think is very helpful. Maybe you've made a headway with it and you want to share it with others. This is the place to have it read. So send us your emails to questions@handsonapologetics.com. It's questions@handsonapologetics.com. That comes straight to the Dojo mailbox, and I do respond. By the way, I do not necessarily respond immediately, but I do eventually respond. So if you recently sent an email, I'm a little bit behind. I'm trying to catch up this week. But nevertheless, you will get a response and perhaps even make it to a radio program. In fact, there's a couple of really good ones that we've recently received. I'm thinking perhaps tomorrow, I might go to the Dojo mailbox and just do a couple of them. I know there's one that I was going to read last time we did this, and we couldn't get to it, so that deserves a quick response. let's see, anything else? Oh, every now and then I should probably mention where you can get a hold of my resources, books, CD sets, things like that. You can go to GaryMachuda.com. That's all one word, Gary Machuda, my name. And that will take you to the website where it has all my books and CDs and lots of other great material, along with some awesome CDs by Dr. Brant Petrie and John Bergsma and others. That's all linked into like one giant website. And also handsonapologetics.com. So there you can get the links to all the shows, and you can also get all the links to all our programs on virginmostpowerfulradio.org. So why don't we jump into the Finding the Fallacy segment, shall we? And like I said, the fallacy for today is the fallacy of relative privation. Relative privation. And this, like I said, it's an intimidating title, but it's actually pretty darn simple because it's also known as the appeal to worse problems or the not as bad as fallacy. And basically, it's used for dismissing an argument or a complaint due to the existence of a more important problem in the world, regardless of whether those problems bear any relevance to the initial argument. In other words, it's a way of dismissing one's argument by pointing out something that is either more deserving of attention or a worst-case scenario. And of course, that is fallacious because that doesn't prove that the question at hand isn't important or whether the proposition isn't true. It's just a way of sidestepping the argument. So another way to look at this is to think of if someone argues that something is true or something is good, okay, you don't disprove those propositions by pointing to something that is less true or less good. Okay, that doesn't make something more true or more good. So you can't say, well, what you say, well, that doesn't really matter because look at this. This is far worse, or this is far more important. It just doesn't follow. So that is our fallacy for today, the fallacy of relative privation, or the not bad as argument. And why don't we jump to the Meet the Early Church Father? And as I said, it's one of my faves. It's an early church father that is very important in Catholic apologetics and Christian apologetics as well. St. Epiphanius of Salamis, who was born sometime around AD 315, died May 12th, 403 AD. He was born in the area of Palestine, not far from Gaza. Like I said, somewhere around the year 315. His episcopacy, he was a bishop, was on the island of Cyprus. However, at Constantia, it's called Salamis. So he goes by not Epiphanius of Cyprus, but Epiphanius of Salamis. Epiphanius is an odd character. He is incredibly combative. In that way, he's very much like St. Jerome, a contemporary of his. St. Jerome loved arguing and skewering people, and he didn't make a lot of friends doing so. In fact, he made quite a few enemies. Epiphanius is kind of like that, but the interesting thing is Jerome loved Epiphanius. Okay, so they're both combative, but apparently they were like two peas in the pod, you could say. They got along great. In fact, Jerome calls him a pentaglot because of his knowledge of Greek, Syriac, Hebrew, Coptic, and Latin. Jerome says that in his treatment on virtuous men, illustration of virtuous men, that Epiphanius' works were eagerly read not only by the learned because of their subject matter, but also by plain people on account of their language. Now, history is a bit more critical of his work. In fact, when we go through every time we read something about the early church fathers, we go to Jurgen's Faith of the Early Church Fathers. And he says that, Epiphanius, no. He wouldn't necessarily agree with Jerome's assessment. For example, he did have some quirks. Like, for example, Epiphanius despised classical learning of Hellenism and viewed any kind, of elegant writings with suspicion. In fact, when the emperor, Julian the Apostate, attempted to disenfranchise Christians and prevent them from teaching rhetoric classes, Epiphanius thought it was a great sign. It was all thumbs up for that. let's see. Some of people, like Photius, said that Epiphanius' writings were careless and verbose, and it's commonly considered that they display the author's characteristic shallowness. Quastian, in his multi-volume work Patrology, also talks of Epiphanius' works as being hasty, superficial, disorderly compilation of the fruitful extent of his reading. In other words, he did a lot of reading, a lot of scholarship, but his writings are kind of a mishmash. And if you ever read his work Panarion or read excerpts from it, you really get that idea. Excuse me, that it is really hard to navigate through it because it's a labyrinth of all sorts of things. Another quirk, too, is although he was with fiery zeal in support of the Nicene Creed, he also was a vehement iconoclast. Okay, so he actually was against the use of images before the great iconoclast heresy came about. He also hated Origen passionately, and that's probably why both he and Jerome became best buddies, because if you remember, Jerome too was a follower of Origen, but then turned against his master and kind of attempted to expose all his errors. So perhaps that's why they ended up being good friends, despite their similar temperament, irascibility, I guess you could say. Let's see. So despite him being perhaps rude and crude, nevertheless, he does present a lot of very interesting information. He gives us information that otherwise we wouldn't have known from the early church. And therefore, he's a very valuable early church father for us to know. So that is St. Epiphanius of Salamis. Coming up on the other side of the break, Ken Hensley coming into the dojo to talk about morality in unbelievers.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. There's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet three men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. 2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands on Apologetics. Well, where do non-believers anchor their morality, or can they anchor morality if they don't believe that God exists? Well, to help us work through this issue, we have Ken Hensley coming into the dojo. He is nationally known Catholic teacher and author who, since converting to the Catholic Church in 1997, has worked extensively in the field of apologetics. He's been interviewed numerous times on Catholic radio, television. He's also a frequent speaker at Catholic conferences around the country. Ken specializes in teaching a range of subjects from natural Christian and Catholic apologetics to scripture, dogmatic and systematic theology, church history, spirituality, and the art of evidentialist and presuppositional apologetics. He works as the online resource and pastoral care coordinator for the Coming Home Network. And Ken Hensley, welcome to Hands on Apologetics.
Hi, Gary. Good to talk to you again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you come on. We're kind of
pretty good. I wonder who you're talking about.
Well, it could only be you, my friend. Only be you.
When I hear that stuff listed, I think, really?
Yeah, I was every now and then I'm a guest, and sometimes I get this split second, like, am I on the wrong day? It can't be me. I know the feeling.
Also, whenever I hear it said that I came into the Catholic Church in 1997, I can't believe it because I still feel like a convert. I feel like I'm new, like I'm a new child in the Church of Christ, Yeah. And yet I'm 65 years old now, and I've been a Catholic for 22 years. So,
wow, yeah, isn't it amazing how time flies? But
yeah, and it goes faster and faster the older you get, and that's a common kind of thing. But I've worked out the mathematics on it. Have I ever shared it with you?
No. Go ahead. Go share it with us.
Well, here's my mathematical theory, and I think it's true. The reason that time seems to go faster the older you get, and it does, everyone agrees, is that each year of your life represents a smaller percentage of your total life. So when you were 16 years old, 1 year was an entire 16th of your existence, and so it felt like a huge era in which all kinds of things happened, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
When you're 60 years old, a year only represents 1/60th of your life, and so as you look at it, it just seems like a blip. Don't you think that's probably right?
Yeah, I agree. So it's kind of an exponential curve. So when you get up to 100, it must be like a year is a split second.
Yeah, and if you're that guy, Methuselah, if you're like 900 years old, each year is just like a day. Or it feels like a day.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to it.
You see it within the context of your whole life. And in fact, since the first 4 or 5 years of your life are pretty much gone, they're a blur and you don't really remember anything. When you're 16, you really only have about 11 or 12 years that you're working with,
That's true, too.
To divide up your... Anyway,
yeah.
So next subject.
I was going to say, well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
But that's a little golden nugget. I like that. I'll have to remember. Think of it in terms of percentages. We're doing well. All things considered. Praise God. How has things been at the Hensley household?
Oh, been just great. I think I've probably told you before, but I have 8 grandchildren now, and they live only 5 minutes from me. So I have a lot of joy just built in every single day, almost. I got a little 3-year-old, smacking me in the face while I'm trying to listen to the homily and things like that. So it's a pretty good life. It's pretty good.
Excellent.
And I'm just so, here's something I've had on my mind recently, just being so grateful that I work at the Coming Home Network, because after leaving the ministry, I wound up just working, other kinds of jobs to earn money for 18 years. And then trying on the side to keep up my study of Scripture and theology and apologetics, and produce some talks here and there, and go and speak at a conference, but always feeling like it was very much part-time because I had to I was a headhunter for 11 years, working in the pharmaceutical world. Then I was a stockbroker for 7 years. And so having to go, and pound, the desk all day long and do a lot of phone calling too, because my job was all about cold calling, really, sales when you think of it. Yeah. And then just in the evening, to try and read a good book. Anyway, I just can't believe that the Lord allowed me, after the age of 60, to wind up back in a situation where I get up every day now, and my whole day is about helping people become Catholic. It's amazing.
Well, thanks, Pete.
Amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know. Yeah. We're blessed. Well, hey, why don't we talk about, switching gears, let's talk about axe murder and the crocodile, shall we?
That is switching gears, yeah.
Yes, I couldn't figure out how to segue.
Axe murder and the crocodile.
Well, this is part of a series. We have you on periodically going through some great articles that you've written. And we're talking about morality and whether or not a non-believer can anchor his morality in something objective while still denying the existence of God. So maybe you could kind of set up the problem.
Well, in this article, and we are working through articles, so I'm looking at it in front of me. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but a series of articles that I did that I titled, How I Evangelize Those Who Doubt or Deny the Existence of God. And so these are apologetic articles, but I think of them even more, or just as much, as evangelism, because I'm not presenting, at least at this point, I'm not presenting proofs for God's existence, but I am presenting arguments for God's existence and arguments that can affect people. And so the way I set this one up, the axe murderer and the crocodile, and our hearers will learn within about 20 minutes what that means. But the way I set it up was by quoting Kai Nielsen in a debate that he did with Christian philosopher J.P. Moreland called Does God Exist? Because I found the most interesting quotation. So this is Kai Nielsen. He's an atheist philosopher. Listen to what he says. He says, "It's wrong, God or no God, to torture little children just for the fun of it. What basis we have for making this confident moral claim is another thing." You know where I'm going with that, Gary. Yeah. What basis we have is another thing. But we know, if we know anything, if we have any moral understanding at all, we know that this is wrong. Now, I see this quotation as illustrating just beautifully the tension, really, that the atheist finds himself in when it comes to this issue of morality. Because notice that on the one hand, Nielsen insists that he knows that torturing little children is wrong, and he uses that word. He knows this, whether there's a God, whether there's no God, whatever the circumstances, he knows this. In fact, he says that if anyone, as much as anyone knows anything, we know, if we have any moral understanding at all, we know that it's wrong. But then he goes on to say, to hint really at the difficulty that he has providing a philosophical grounding for what he's saying, when he says what basis we have for making this confident moral claim is another thing. And that's kind of what I am saying. I'm listening to the atheist who says, look, I understand that as an atheist, I believe that nothing really exists fundamentally but atoms bouncing into, interacting with one another, bouncing back and forth, that the universe is entirely from top to bottom, from bottom to top, a material universe, and yet I still know that the torture of little children is absolutely wrong. I know this. And I like to ask the question then, on what basis do you know this? On what basis do you make this confident moral claim? After all, according to Richard Dawkins, probably the most famous and prolific atheist writing now, Dawkins says that our godless universe, the universe that we live in, that an atheist lives in, is a universe in which there is, quote, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Well, yeah. Gary, if that's the universe that we live in, a universe in which objectively there is no good, no evil, no design, no purpose, blind, pitiless indifference in all directions, then how does he know that it's wrong? On what premise does he declare so confidently that it's wrong to torture little children just for the fun of it? This is a question that I like to put to someone I'm talking to who doesn't believe in God. And of course, I'm thinking, well, the reason he knows it's wrong is because he's been created in the image of God.
Yeah.
And God's God's character, expressed in the moral law, is written on his soul. And so he knows that it's wrong, and I understand that, and I agree with it, and I'm happy that he knows that it's wrong. But what I want to do in evangelism is I want to press him to try and give a grounding for it, give an accounting for it in terms of what he says is true of the universe in which we live.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and that's been a thread that's been running through this entire series has been where the Christian worldview makes sense of this, but it's really the unbeliever's worldview that it ends up being incoherent, that their own experience of the world is incoherent with their belief system. And so, so we have an explanation why they can say that, but they don't seem to really have one.
Yeah, like in our conversation so far, we've worked through a couple of issues. You know, we talked about the approach, but then we talked about, for instance, the value of human life, right? Mm-hmm. Now we're talking about morality. And in both cases, we have a situation where the atheist just knows intuitively that right and wrong are real, that they exist. The atheist knows intuitively that human life is precious and has special value. And yet, when he tries to explain how he can account for that in terms of an atheist worldview, he finds himself all tied in knots. And, and having to admit, I think I pulled in that quotation from the president of PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, where she says something about a rat is a pig, is a dog, is a boy, they're all mammals, we don't make any distinction between them,
Right. Yeah.
Which I'd like to ask you. So does that mean that if a building was on fire and there were rats and pigs and boys and dogs in the building, you would run in and you'd have a hard time figuring out who to try to save? I mean, you'd literally be confused because they're all the same to you. And so you would look around, you look at the pig, and you think, oh, maybe I should save the pig. And, oh, but there's a rat. Oh, well, there's a boy. But then again, there's a dog. Which one should I save?
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you see a burning building, your first thought isn't, good Lord, all the rats might die. Your first thought is, good Lord, there might be people in the building.
Yeah, and so, the things with the whole approach is based on the idea that because the fact is that the atheist, whatever he says about the universe, whatever she says, is the image and likeness of God. The atheist knows a lot of things intuitively and knows them to be true, and they all make sense within a Christian worldview, but they don't make sense within their worldview.
Very good. Talking to Ken Hensley. Stay tuned, everybody.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. There's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet three men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're talking with Ken Hensley about, the axe murder and the crocodile, but that's probably too obscure. So maybe we could boil it down to, trying to find a solid, objective basis for morality. And Ken, I know this is one of those areas where you talk to non-believers that you have a lot of pushback because they often feel like you're accusing them of not having any morality, that atheists are just automatically bad people, they're immoral, they're amoral. And they'll say, no, I'm moral. Most of the non-believers I know are very moral people.
Yes. In fact, that's exactly right. The normal response that I will get is something like, hey, it sounds like you're saying atheists are bad people. It sounds like you're saying that atheists don't believe in right and wrong, and I want to make this very clear, and so I'm glad you asked it. What I'm saying actually is the reverse. What I'm saying is that because atheists have been created in the image of God, and because they have the moral law etched into their beings, they cannot escape believing in right and wrong. So I'm not saying they don't believe in right and wrong. I'm saying they can't escape believing in right and wrong. And because they can't escape believing in it, most of them attempt to live according to it. So I'm not saying that atheists are bad people. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is simply that they have no basis for what they know intuitively to be true, and they have no basis philosophically for it in their worldview. Atheists admit this all the time. Let me read quickly a quotation from philosopher Michael Roos. He's an atheist philosopher. He's very well known. This is what he says. Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than hands and feet and teeth. It's just an adaptation that occurred biologically through the process of evolution. That's what he says morality is. I continue. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory. Ethics is an illusion. I appreciate that when somebody says, love thy neighbor as thyself, they think they are referring to some moral law existing above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. So he's admitting it. It's without foundation. Quote, morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, an ephemeral product of the evolutionary process. It has no existence or being beyond this, and any deeper meaning is illusory. So I'm not saying anything different than what the smartest and most consistent atheist philosophers are admitting. The idea of an objective right and wrong, the idea of moral standards existing in this universe is an illusion. It's just, morality is just an adaptation. It's like our teeth or hands or fingernails or whatever. And so what happens is that atheist philosophers have to start figuring out what kind of standard they want to dream up. I mean, it's up to each person, essentially, to dream up their own standard that they're going to live by and then maybe inconsistently to impose on others. And that's where we get into the axe murder and the crocodile. Well, not quite yet, because the first standard that I talk about in my article is the happiness standard. This is one that's very common, and the idea is, okay, we don't need God in order to have ethics. We don't need to have God in order to have morality. We can decide that morality will be based on a consideration of what brings, quote, the greatest total amount of happiness in each situation. And this is the standard that the very famous Peter Singer, who's professor of bioethics at Princeton University, he may have retired now, but for many, many years, professor of bioethics at Princeton, this is his standard of morality. Whatever brings the greatest total amount of happiness in every situation. So what he's saying is that there is a standard. We just have to figure out what will bring about the greatest amount of happiness in every situation. And let me just throw out one illustration that we can talk about a little bit. The illustration of abortion. It's really interesting to hear the way that he argues for abortion, because it's not like most pro-abortion advocates argue. You know, most pro-abortion advocates will accept the idea that innocent human life should not be snuffed out. And then they will simply argue that the fetus is not innocent human life, correct?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Singer does it the absolute reverse. Singer accepts the premise that innocent human life should never be snuffed out. In fact, Singer, as an atheist, says that it's a total fiction to try to argue that the fetus is not an innocent human life. Says it's a total fiction. So he accepts this premise that unborn fetus is a human life. What he rejects is the idea that innocent human lives should never be taken. Rather, he argues that innocent human lives can be taken if the result is a greater total amount of happiness, which opens some amazing ethical doors that he's happy to walk through. In a book that he wrote called Practical Ethics, he gives this illustration. He says, when the death of a disabled infant will lead to the birth of another infant with better prospects for a happy life, the total amount of happiness will be greater if the disabled infant is killed. The loss of a happy life for the first infant is outweighed by the gain of a happier life for the second one, not yet born. Therefore, if killing the hemophiliac infant has no adverse effect on others, I mean, if the people around don't really care, according to this total view, it would be right to kill him. How does that strike you? I mean, this is Peter Singer, professor of bioethics at Princeton, speaking exactly like the Nazi scientists and doctors, you know?
Yeah. And it really is shocking, to think about that, because it's was it Darwinian ethics? It's basically, if it's enfeebled or somebody is not quite up to snuff, then kill them, and they'll make we'll breed more healthy, happy humans.
Yeah, and as soon as you hear that, I mean, the mind just has to go to the eugenics, the commitment to eugenics of the Nazis and all. I mean, because that was exactly their position. If we want pure Aryan blood, and we want a healthy German society, and if there are people who are crippled, then it will contribute to the overall health and happiness of our society for them to be killed. Right. And if we have homosexuals, kill them. If we have Jews, kill them for sure. Right down the line. And Peter Singer is saying exactly the same thing. And the implications are just amazing to think through. I mean, in your family, it's like if you guys had one child, let's say, that had Down syndrome, then you could sit around as a family and you could say, hey, you know what? Our vacations have just been a mess because everywhere we go, I mean, we can't go into a restaurant without, our son or daughter making a lot of noise and people staring, and it's just odd. We could take this child down to the extermination center and we could increase the total happiness that our family is experiencing. You see where this goes?
Yeah,
it can go anywhere. Right. I mean, what could you not justify if if your standard of evaluation didn't include the idea that some acts are intrinsically evil, right? But it was only looking at or trying to calculate in a scale the total amount of happiness.
Right.
Not only is it a completely vague standard, but it could justify anything. I mean, a state could justify killing innocent people, executing innocent people, because you could say, hey, look, if we just behead about 25 U.S. citizens every morning, then we will scare the rest of the population into not breaking the law. So we just pick out 25 random people, innocent people. You can justify anything on the standard of happiness, and yet this is one of the primary standards that atheists will go to, because they have no standard built into their worldview. They have to dream one up, and this seems plausible, the greatest amount of happiness.
Yeah, well,
So
that's essentially John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, isn't it? Just the greatest good for the greatest amount of people.
Yes, it is, and I hadn't made that connection mentally, but yeah, I think it's exactly the same thing. I mean, it's utilitarian for sure. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Now,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the other thing, as you were speaking, it struck me that why would our happiness necessarily correspond to anything that would be positive for evolution? Because isn't it possible that what makes me happy would be something that wouldn't propagate the species or harm the propagation of the species?
Yeah, again, I think you're saying something really insightful, because philosophically speaking, the thing that kills a philosophical hypothesis is arbitrariness and inconsistency. Mm-hmm. And although I don't say that right here in the article, you could say about this standard of happiness that, first of all, it's arbitrary. You're just pulling it out of your hat. In an atheist universe, why shouldn't I adopt a different standard? Why shouldn't I adopt the standard of whatever the majority says is right, is good, or some other standard? So it's arbitrary, but you're pointing out it's also inconsistent with your worldview, because your atheistic evolutionary worldview would say, who cares about happiness? What's important is reproduction, right?
Yeah, right.
Nothing but, so your standard ought to be whatever leads to, the survival of the fittest and the greatest reproduction, something like that. Who cares about happiness?
Yeah.
No, you're right. It's not even consistent. So it's inconsistent and it's arbitrary. I want to move on to the other one, though, because this is the fun one with the axe murderer and the crocodile.
Okay. Well, actually, Ken, why don't you hold it there, because we have like a minute before the break. I hate for you to get rolling and then the music starts. But yeah, just finishing up on that last thought, as people become more secularized, they're pursuing their own happiness. They stop having children. That's how it is in first world countries. That they get older and they stop having kids, and that seems
because they're thinking
evolution.
Because at least a lot of people are thinking, like, hey, look, you have kids, it's going to cost money. We won't be as free to go out. We can both work, have two incomes. We can go out to nice restaurants all the time.
Yeah.
I met a couple that said that explicitly. We want to be able to go on nice vacations, and yeah.
Yeah, very good. Hey, we're talking with Ken Hensley about how do non-believers anchor their moral system, and how the Christian worldview makes more sense. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This is Terry Barber inviting you, all the men, to a men's conference June 15th at the Sacred Heart Chapel. This is going to be a day where we're going to talk about true masculinity. There's a problem in the Catholic Church today. We have very few men who love the Catholic faith. And I know a lot of the wives that I'm listening to right now saying, I want my husband to be on fire for the faith. Send him to the men's conference. Your son, send him to the men's conference by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. That's June 15th. When your husband comes back from this conference, or your son, they're going to have a different view about their Catholic faith, because they're going to meet three men who love Jesus and his bride, the church, and are going to instill in them a love for Christ and his church, the Eucharist, Our Lady. Bring them to virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Sign up there or call 877-526-2151. Full sheen ahead.
It is only because of your continued prayers and generous donations that Virgin Most Powerful Radio can broadcast live each weekday. We count on your spiritual and financial support because you understand the urgent need for Catholic programming that shares the gospel with clarity and charity, but without compromise. Please prayerfully consider becoming a monthly donor. You can set it up with the touch of a button on our website, catholicrc.org.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. We're chatting with Kenneth Hensley about ethics. And does the Christian, the theistic worldview make more sense of experience than non-believers? And Ken, of course, we're talking about your article, The Axe Murderer and the Crocodile. So I'll just let you go, because what a great cliffhanger, to find out what in the world does that mean.
Yeah, what in the world? Okay, well, we were talking about Peter Singer, very, very famous personality in the atheist world, philosopher, and his happiness standard. And now I want to talk about Sam Harris, who's probably, along with Richard Dawkins, he's probably the most famous now. He's more on the philosophy side. The more famous, the most famous Catholic popular kind of philosopher, talking and debating and out there in the world now. He's written several books. Sam Harris is his name, and he kind of takes off from Peter Singer's idea that as an atheist of grounding morality in the idea of happiness. What will bring the greatest total amount of happiness? And he rephrases it to talk about the well-being and health of conscious creatures. The well-being and health of conscious creatures. And he basically says, you know what? To the question, can science answer moral questions? I mean, traditionally people have said no. You'll hear statements like, well, look, science can talk about what is. Science can examine the nature of the material world and describe what is. But science can't tell you what ought to be. Science can't, declare to you what is right and wrong and what ought to be. And Sam Harris challenges this. Sam Harris says, you know what? Since what is moral is, or I'll put it another way, since morality is concerned with increasing the happiness and the well-being of conscious creatures, especially human beings, but all conscious creatures, and because all of the questions we could ask do have factual answers, he says science could determine it. Now, that was kind of ambiguous. Let me put it in different words. What he's basically saying is this. Ask the question, does abortion on demand, does it tend toward the enhancement of human happiness and well-being? He's saying, well, scientists may not know the answer now, but scientists maybe could discover the answer. If we had a powerful enough computer and we were able to input all the appropriate data, then maybe we could actually get a scientific answer to the question of whether abortion on demand tends toward the enhancement of human happiness and well-being overall. Same with infanticide. Same with, transsexualism, same-sex marriage, all the different issues. There is an objective answer somewhere. There's an objective answer, and he says science may not know the answer now, but science could figure out the answer in time. And so we ought to allow science to study all these issues and tell us whether the transgender movement, for instance, tell us whether this is something that tends toward increasing human happiness and well-being or not. And we will call good whatever we discover tends toward this, and we will call bad whatever we discover doesn't tend toward this. Okay, so you follow the idea?
Okay. Yeah, I'm following.
Okay, and now I appreciate him being clear on this, and there is truth in what he's saying in this sense, that when God teaches us what is right and what is wrong, it is for our good. To follow the moral law as it's been written into our souls and delivered to us through divine revelation, to follow the moral law is for our happiness and well-being. And so there's a sense in which he's right, but where he goes off the track is that when you read it and when you think through what he's saying, it turns out that he is viewing morality in a completely utilitarian point of view again, like Michael Roos or like we were just talking about with Peter Singer. For instance, he gives illustrations. This is where the axe murderer and the crocodile come in. He gives illustrations, and he uses at one point, who's that guy up in Washington that killed like 30, 40 women and finally was put to death in Utah? What? I can't remember his name now. Yeah, Bundy.
Okay.
He uses in one of his talks Ted Bundy as an illustration. And this is what he says. He says, look, Ted Bundy, when he killed all those women, was doing only what he had to do, given his background, given his psychological condition, given, all the previous states of the universe leading up to that in his life. And so he's like a crocodile, and when a crocodile jumps out and bites you, we don't say that the crocodile is evil. We don't pronounce the crocodile guilty, and we don't talk about the crocodile being morally accountable. We don't talk in moral terms. We just realize that the crocodile was doing what crocodiles do, and in order to enhance human happiness, we want to get rid of the crocodile. And he says the same thing about Ted Bundy. He says, Ted Bundy only did what he had to do, given his brain chemistry and his background and whatnot, and therefore to start throwing around terms like evil or to speak of his guilt or him being morally accountable and deserving punishment, this is not helpful at all. In fact, the way he describes Ted Bundy is to say that it would be more accurate to say Ted Bundy is he's just lousy at enhancing human happiness.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because morality, moral law does not exist. Right. He has reinterpreted moral law in terms of this scientific view as just whatever factually tends to increase human happiness and well-being is good, and whatever doesn't increase it is bad. And therefore, words like evil, guilt, punishment, none of them make sense anymore. And the axe murderer is this. So the axe murderer is like a crocodile. That's the point of the title. An axe murderer who goes around, chopping people up is just exactly like a crocodile. And he ought to be treated like a crocodile. You put him in a cage because he's hurting people, but we don't think of him as being evil or being immoral or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the illustration that came to my mind when I was... Oh, go ahead, Gary.
No, I was just going to say, because he's predetermined by his physiology, his evolutionary makeup, social pressures, whatever. He can't help but be an axe murderer, just like a crocodile can't help but act like a crocodile.
Yeah, that's part of Sam Harris's whole view, because being a total materialist, he also does not believe in free will, which we'll come to in another session. And so he believes that human beings act exactly like crocodiles or snakes or anything like that. And so the illustration that came to my mind, or the analogy, is traffic laws. When we pass traffic laws, we're not, when we pass a law that says, you have to drive on the right side of the road, not the left side here in America, we don't say, because driving on the left side is immoral. It's evil.
Right.
We don't say that. We just say, no, you drive on the right side. It's totally utilitarian. You drive on the right side, and so that we won't have our streets just, running with rivers of blood.
Right.
It's totally utilitarian. And when you examine Sam Harris's view of morality, it becomes exactly like that. He's basically saying, don't chop up little children with axes, because this does not conduce to greater happiness and human well-being.
Right.
Exactly like not driving on the wrong side of the road.
Yeah, right. Or running a red light or something like that. Yeah.
So that's just giving another illustration. You can go through other illustrations, which I didn't include here. You know, like some people have said, some people have actually suggested, you know, that democracy is the answer to moral questions. And if we could implant a little chip in every person, for instance, in the United States, and we could keep a running table of what they think about things, we could base our moral law on that. So if 51% of the people in the United States today think that abortion is evil, then it will be evil. And then if it shifts next week and 53% think that abortion is good, then it will be good.
Right.
So you could base morality on pure majority rule as well.
Right.
And then there are
so
others who say, hey, look, whatever scientists tell us is right, and so forth. But the problem you face with all of these views, I mean, I'm thinking of the Marquis de Sade as well, who took a straight, evolutionary view, and he said nature has made men stronger than women, and therefore men can do whatever they want to women. Anything you want. And the problem with all of these, when you think about them, you can come up with a lot of alternative standards to God's law. But when you think about them, they're all arbitrary, because if we've all just evolved up out of the soup, and there really is no objective standard at all, then we're just making up whatever we want. They're arbitrary.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, arbitrary and inconsistent. And yet, it's funny, they all see it as something that everybody should recognize, right? That everybody should know it's wrong to torture a child for fun. But you're right, ultimately it becomes down to personal choice or preference or, your worldview.
Yeah, which is kind of like what we were talking about last month, that people can say that morality is relative from person to person, and that's very, very common now, to say that morality is relative from culture to culture, and then, or to say, well, morality is based on whatever you think will bring the greatest happiness, or whatever will, lead to the greatest human flourishing and whatnot. But we don't believe this. None of us believe this in our heart of hearts. No one ever looked at Charles Manson or Idi Amin or Joseph Stalin or Hitler or Mao Zedong. No one ever looked at these people and said, yeah, these guys were not very good at the enhancement of human happiness. Right. No one thinks like that. And I'm sure Sam Harris has never thought of these guys and said, there's no reason to call them evil or to hold them morally accountable. They're only doing what they have to do. You just get tied up in knots in this because of our nature. We want to say that what Hitler did was wrong, but according to our own logic, we have to say, well, what Hitler did, I just don't agree with. He had a different point of view. Maybe his standard for morality was different than mine, and so forth. So, all these are just more illustrations of the fact that on an atheist basis, there's no way to come up with a standard of, morality does not exist objectively.
Yeah, very good. Well, hey, thanks, Ken. I can't believe the hour has flown, but we appreciate you being on the program.
Oh, you're welcome. We'll talk to you later, Gary. Bye-bye.
All right. That's Ken Hensley. And coming up next, the Terry and Jesse Show. And you can get all of Ken's great stuff, by the way, at KennethHensley.com. It's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center, turn off the lights at the dojo. Great time to be with you and work through these issues. I hope you enjoyed the program. And I wish everybody have a great and blessed day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.